So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Fair Housing session on urban California. My name is Veronica Katayama. I'm a specialist within the Fair Housing Unit in HCD's Housing Policy Development Division. For any of you who may find it difficult to see me on your screen, I'll describe myself. I'm a white woman with light brown, wavy, shoulder-length hair, and today I'm wearing a dark orange shirt. So we have a group of folks from HCD's Fair Housing team with us today, but your presenters will be me and Shannon West, who is the Housing Accountability Unit Chief. Some housekeeping here. So for today's session, we'd like to go over a few community standards to encourage an open and productive dialogue. So if you wish to speak, please raise your Zoom hand by clicking the raise hand icon located at the bottom of your screen, and we'll enable the ability to unmute your microphone so that you can share your thoughts. Please use the Q&A icon located at the bottom of your screen to share any comments. If you wish to stay anonymous, you can go ahead and choose that option when you're writing your message. Also, the Q&A name doesn't really fit this session because we won't be answering questions, but we're really here to listen to input. We'll be asking you some questions at the end of this presentation as well. Be mindful of different styles of communication and learning. Please recognize that some of us are external processors who think out loud, while others are internal processors who need time to reflect before they can contribute. Be mindful of the space that you occupy in these conversations, allowing others to participate. Be curious. Embrace today's, embrace the opportunity to learn from one another. If someone shares something new or unfamiliar, stay curious. Take note of their comments and revisit them later for further exploration. Use I statements. During today's session, when sharing your thoughts or experiences, please use I statements. This approach fosters a non-defensive atmosphere and it encourages constructive dialogue. So for example, you might say, I don't understand, can you please rephrase? Rather than saying, you don't make any sense. Help us explore and develop the fair housing impediments. Your firsthand or even secondhand knowledge can help us shape our goals for addressing impediments in the upcoming 5-year cycle. If you choose not to speak today, or if you think of something that you'd like to share at a later point, you can always email us at aifairhousingreport@hcd.ca.gov. So looking at today's agenda, we're going to begin by sharing an overview of the AI update timeline and our public engagement plan, and then we'll discuss current trends and existing conditions. Then we'll cover HCD's housing accountability work. And finally, we'll provide you with some questions and open it up for discussion. We'll also launch these questions as polls so that you can enter your typed responses that way if you choose. So let's take a look at the timeline, outreach, and engagement. The AI team held its kickoff webinar back on January 4th, and we're currently in the listening sessions and webinars phase of the timeline. We've conducted 6 listening sessions so far. Registration links for these events were included in the e-blast that you likely received if you're signed up for our listserv. And additionally, registration links are available on HCD's website. Our final presentation in the series is going to be next week on March 20th. At the same time, we're seeking feedback through our Community Needs Assessment Survey until April 1st. Following this, we will work to finalize our report. We plan to open the public comment period and hold hearings from mid-July to mid-August, and we are planning to complete the final version and publish at the end of August. As I said, we've completed 6 listening sessions. This included a focus on homelessness, disability and the aging population, persons who are immigrants, Indigenous, tribal, and Native peoples, tenant protections, and mobile home parks. Our webinars will be handled very similarly, including today's session on urban California and next week's session on rural. Our public hearings will take place from mid-July through mid-August. And we're still finalizing the dates and locations for these public hearings, so stay tuned for updates, and any changes due to the state's budget would be promptly communicated to you as well. We released the Community Needs Assessment Survey on January 30th in English, Spanish, Chinese, Korean, Tagalog, and Vietnamese. The survey will remain available until April 1st of this year, and we encourage everyone to complete the survey and to encourage others as well to do it. You can access the survey on HCD's website by going to the site, and on the main page, you'll see at the top an option that says Begin Survey. So you can click on that and it'll give you a drop down. You can look at your preferred language. So we'll continue mentioning this during any of our public meetings held until April 1st. So let's take a look at some current data trends and existing conditions related to urban California. California's housing crisis is half a century in the making. Decades of underproduction, underscored by exclusionary policies, have left housing supply far behind need and costs soaring. As a result, millions of Californians who are disproportionately lower income and people of color must make hard decisions about paying for housing at the expense of food, healthcare, childcare, and transportation. 1 in 3 households in the state do not earn enough money to meet their basic needs. Today, more than a third of households cannot afford their home. Housing is considered affordable when a household pays less than 1/3 of their income on all housing costs. If a household pays more than 30%, if a household pays more than 30% of their income on housing, it's considered cost burdened and therefore unaffordable. California's inadequate and vulnerable supply of affordable homes disproportionately impacts our most vulnerable communities. On the left side of this graph, you'll see that before 1990, California averaged more than 200,000 units a year in housing production, with a much larger percentage of multifamily development. While there have always been some peaks and valleys, the quantity has overall greatly reduced. As you can see on the right side of the graph, over the past 14 years, the state has produced an average of approximately 92,000 units per year. This reduced production of units has been a contributing factor to the state's high housing costs. Some of this is due to the recession, but some of it's also due to barriers that housing construction contends with throughout the development process. There are numerous barriers to development, including local opposition to new development, which can impact any community. It occurs when a new development proposal, like affordable housing, supportive housing, or shelters, are delayed or even rejected for subjective or irrelevant reasons. Responding to the persistent requests of established residents, local government frequently implement housing and land use regulations with the motive of preserving neighborhood character by prohibiting alternative housing forms and deferring potential low-income or minority residents from moving in. However, excessive residential land use regulation in metropolitan regions create equity concerns and efficiency losses. Specifically, when supply of housing is inelastic in cities with growing labor markets, housing prices outpace the growth of wages. This pushes what are considered to be low-skill workers to seek housing and employment away from metro areas where land is less regulated. Studies examining the effects of local residential land use regulations on the supply and price of housing have revealed a number of impacts, such as raising the local minimum lot size by 1 acre, which is a common single-family zoning requirement in some cities, results in nearly a 10% increase in local housing prices. Another researcher similarly found that adding 1 additional land use regulation in an existing community reduces local residential building permits issued by between 4 and 8%. Of most importance is the overall research findings that the relative stringency of local land use controls influence the average price of an acre of land available for single-family housing, resulting in increased housing prices. So now let's look at cost burden trends of renter households by race and ethnicity. Remember, cost burden occurs when more than 30% of a household's income goes toward their housing expenses. Renters of color in California face the highest cost burden. For example, nearly 2/3 of Black households are cost burdened, compared to under half of white households. Notice that the white households have the lowest severe cost burden, which is when more than 50% of income goes toward housing expenses. This slide shows extremely low income renter households, where the majority, or 37%, shown in orange, are the labor force. 33%, there in green, are seniors, 13% have a disability, 12% are classified other, 4% are in school, and 2% are single adult caregivers. California is short nearly 1 million homes affordable to extremely low income renters who need nearly $88,000 to afford a 2-bedroom unit at HUD's fair market rent. I'm going to pass the presentation over to Shannon West now to go over HCD's accountability and enforcement work.
Thank you, Veronica. Again, I'm Shannon West. I'm the Housing Accountability Unit Chief here at the Department of Housing and Community Development. Today, we'll be talking about who we are, what we do, how we do it, and how we collaborate with folks like you who are participating in this webinar. Next slide, please. So our purpose, broadly speaking, is to ensure that all local jurisdictions, that's cities and counties in California, and there are 539 or maybe 540, that are required to meet their fair share of the state's housing needs and promote housing production at all income levels. We do this in part by providing incentives and planning grants that promote housing production. But the Housing Accountability Unit is really more responsible for parts 2 and 3 on this slide, which is to provide education and technical assistance to jurisdictions to help them understand and implement the law, and when necessary, holding them accountable for following through by enforcement actions that I'll describe. Next slide. So the Housing Accountability Unit was technically formed in September of 2021 by Governor Newsom. Some of the work that this unit has been doing has really begun even before the formation of the unit. Assembly Bill 72 was passed in 2017 and became effective in 2018. And it gave HCD the authority to enforce housing elements, state density bonus law, the Housing Accountability Act, and no net loss law, which we can talk about on a future slide. But the resources to actually do this work has been increasing a bit over time, and the formation of the unit began in 2021. We've now grown to about 40 staff members over 5 different teams. The next slide will show you kind of where we fit into the organization more broadly. So the Land Use and Local Government Relations section is under the Housing Policy Development Division. The Housing Accountability Unit is part of that. You'll see, as I described earlier, that there is a whole team that is also focusing on planning grants and incentives. We think of this as the carrots, and the Housing Accountability Unit as the sticks, right? If the local governments aren't doing the right thing, we're over here to hold them accountable. Next slide. So even this work is divided and organized kind of by proactive enforcement and tip-based enforcement. Candidly, my work is tip-based enforcement, but I'm here to talk also about my counterparts' work doing proactive enforcement. So I mentioned AB 72, AB 215 of 2021 also expanded our enforcement authority, and I'll talk about our statutory authorities on a later slide. But we receive tips, complaints, requests for technical assistance. They can come from housing developers, they can come from local governments themselves, from housing advocates, or really anybody in a neighborhood who is observing a city maybe not upholding their obligations. The proactive enforcement team is doing more work that is directed by HCD. So we are looking at enforcing housing elements. Probably worth backing up to talk about what is a housing element. A housing element is every jurisdiction's plan for how they will meet their fair share of housing. A housing element, if you're familiar, is a part of a general plan, and it is the only element of a general plan that is required to be reviewed and certified by a state department, and in this case, by the Department of Housing and Community Development. Within those plans are programs. So there could be rezone programs in order to meet their housing need. They may need to upzone parts of the city to accommodate more density. There could be other programs related to fair housing issues. In fact, most housing elements have programs related to fair housing issues. The proactive enforcement team is set up to review annual progress. Each city and county is required to submit annual progress reports on April 1st every year. And part of their reporting is to report on the progress they are making toward the programs included in their housing element. So the proactive enforcement team is systematically looking at data, looking for ways to ensure that local governments are implementing their own housing elements. The team also includes Surplus Land Act enforcement as well as preservation noticing law. Next slide. So the team that does the broad housing and accountability work is not just HPD or Housing Policy Division's Housing Accountability Unit, but we do this in partnership with our own internal legal affairs division, as well as the Attorney General's Housing Justice team. So I'll talk about that relationship a little bit later. Next slide. This is small and no one will be quizzed, but this is a slide that shows you our enumerated authority. So where does HCD get the authority to enforce housing laws? We get it from Government Code Section 65585, Subdivision J, and it provides a list. It includes all of the things you see on this screen. I have put in bold the ones that I think might be the most meaningful to this audience, which is housing element law. Again, as I mentioned, most housing elements have programs within their housing element to affirmatively further fair housing, and other programs that are maybe not labeled as such, but are certainly related. Land use discrimination law and affirmatively furthering fair housing statute are enumerated. But I will also highlight the Housing Accountability Act is one that limits a local government's ability to deny a project basically for subjective reasons. It limits the review of projects that qualify. Projects that are consistent with the general plan, projects that are consistent with zoning, that meet all of the objective standards in place, should not be denied. And the Housing Accountability Act exists really for that purpose. We evaluate requests from housing developers all the time about projects that are either being wrongfully denied or potentially expected to be denied, and we'll review and intervene. Density bonus law, if you're not familiar, is one that incentivizes affordable housing for market rate developers. So if a market rate developer proposes a certain number of affordable units and it is proportionate to level of affordability, so the statute's actually very clear about exactly how many units need to be provided and at what affordability level. But for developers who do that, they can receive some incentives. So maybe ways to reduce some of the regulatory limits on development. That is you give affordable units, you get some type of break in the law. And that all exists under state statute, and it is a statute that we enforce. I won't read through all of them, but those are, I think, some of the most important ones, I think, to this audience, but you are certainly welcome to do your own reading. It is all included in Government Code Section 65585, Subdivision J. Next slide. So housing element proactive enforcement. I did pause earlier and talk about what a housing element is, and what you should know about them, as they are done on a usually an 8-year cycle, sometimes a 5-year cycle in rural areas, but for urban jurisdictions, typically speaking, they are done on 8-year cycles. In the past, up until AB 72 passed in 2017, nobody was really able to hold a jurisdiction accountable to the promises that they were making. And so it was a paper exercise. It was something a city and county would do every 8 years. They'd pull it off the shelf. They'd look at it and say, how did we do with our housing commitments this planning cycle? Could we do better in the next 8 years? Revise their housing element, put it right back on the shelf. And it turns out, based on all of the data that Veronica shared earlier, housing production is declining, and maybe that method of planning wasn't working very well. So now housing elements are no longer a paper exercise. With the authority that HCD has to hold communities accountable to the commitments that they make in their housing elements are a lot stronger, and they're a much more robust tool for the state to ensure that our local communities are working in partnership with us to accommodate our housing need. Next slide. So proactive enforcement can be broken into 4 categories. Broadly speaking, there are jurisdictions who maybe never submit a housing element draft at all. That is a much, much smaller subset than it used to be now that we have enforcement authority, but it is true. There are some jurisdictions that haven't submitted, and we go after those ones pretty aggressively. The next category are those housing elements that remain out of compliance despite our technical assistance. So HCD receives a draft housing element, and we must either certify the element or provide written findings of noncompliance. If we have provided written findings of noncompliance and a jurisdiction remains out of compliance because they haven't revised their element sufficiently to be consistent with state housing laws, that is another category of jurisdiction that HCD will be carefully investigating. The third category are those who are maybe rezoning in order to accommodate housing needs. So they don't have enough available land at a high enough density to accommodate their housing need, and they need to do a rezone. There's a limited amount of time for them to complete those to be consistent with state law. And then finally, the long-term housing element implementation category. This is the ongoing work I was describing earlier, where housing elements all include programs and programmatic commitments. A good program is one that is measurable and has time limits so that HCD can measure whether or not those commitments are being made. So the proactive enforcement team is looking at those programs on a systematic basis. Next slide. So the consequences of housing element non-compliance. Why does this matter? It matters, we think, to the state because we think it's an important exercise to plan for your housing need, but it matters to cities because if a city does not have a compliant housing element, they become ineligible for certain state funds. This is not an exhaustive list, but there are some examples here. Permanent local housing allocation, local housing trust fund, infill infrastructure grant program, and others. If those incentives aren't enough to make a city comply, there is something you might have heard of in housing circles called the Builder's Remedy. The Builder's Remedy is actually subdivision D, paragraph 5 of the Housing Accountability Act, and it limits an ability of a local government to deny a housing project based on inconsistency with zoning and general plan standards. It's a pretty scary proposition because it really opens up the ability to propose projects that are wildly inconsistent, frankly, with what a city had envisioned. So it really should be an incentive to local governments to get a compliant housing element to avoid a position of having to process a project that would be that inconsistent with their own general plan and zoning standards. And finally, legal ramifications. It is important to note HCD does not have any legal remedy to impose fines, but the courts do. So HCD's last step, and we'll talk about kind of the progression of our enforcement activity, but the last step on that chart is HCD can make a referral to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General can sue a local government on behalf of the state, on behalf of HCD. And there can be legal remedies that range from $10,000 to $1,000 per month. But again, only courts can issue and levy those penalties. It is also important to note that private parties can and do sue for housing element compliance as well. So this is not something that only HCD or only the Attorney General can do. Private parties can also make these complaints. Next slide. So how we do it, we couldn't really keep track of the entire state. Like I said, there's 40 of us, which is a much bigger team than we were when we started, but it's still insufficient to really be everywhere in the state at all times. So we rely a lot on input from stakeholders. This includes developers, advocates, local jurisdictions, other stakeholders. Anybody really can submit to us potential violations of state housing laws. We have 3 portals set up. The first one is the Housing Accountability Unit portal. If you have access to these slides later, these are hyperlinks that you can click on. There's the Accessory Dwelling Unit portal, the Surplus Land Act portal. If you have housing element questions specifically, we have a joint email address. And similarly for preservation noticing law, we have a joint email address. Reach out to us. We're here for that. Next slide. So this is describing how to get there. So if you go to our webpage, you hover over planning and community development, you'll get to the accountability and enforcement kind of menu. You'll see a box that says submit technical assistant requests and potential violations to HCD for review. And if you do that, the next slide will show you what that looks like. So this is the prompt that you'll get. You'll need to create an account and then fill in, it says a good number of blanks. It really is a good number of blanks. We need information in order to process these requests, but it will be relevant information. So if you are submitting a technical assistance request related to a housing project, we're going to want to know how many units, how many affordable units, where is it located? Has there been a public hearing about this? Maybe the Planning Commission has recently denied the project and it's going up for appeal. Those kinds of details are the things that we're going to be looking for in order to process the request. Next slide. So what happens after you submit a request? An analyst is going to be assigned. You're going to you'll get an email back that confirms who your analyst is and that the case has been created. The analyst is going to review everything provided. So this could include staff reports, it could include application materials, etc. The analyst will usually reach out to the requester and make sure that they have the full context of what the situation is, and then balance that with reaching out to the local agency. Once that research has been done, the analyst will put together preliminary findings and present it to the team. They're going to be looking for inconsistencies with the state housing laws that we enforce. Remember that slide, I don't know, 8 slides back that had a long list of small printed enforcement authorities. Those are the authorities or the areas of state law that we will be looking for inconsistencies. Once a next step has been determined, we move on, and I think the next slide describes what next steps could be. So it is possible that additional review is needed. Maybe we don't have all of the information we need to make a conclusion. It's possible that HAU declines the case. Usually that's where we don't see any type of violation, but it can sometimes be related to resources. More often, we provide technical assistance in some way. So we can do that verbally, we can do that by email. We often do that in a formal letter of technical assistance. All of our TA letters are available on our website. And finally, we can escalate into enforcement action. Next slide. So my apologies, I know this is almost impossible to read. This flow chart is available on our website. Again, you will have access to these slides and may be able to zoom in and see it better. But I think it's okay because really what I want to describe is high level anyway. So what you'll notice at the top of the chart, we review information in the process I just described, and most often we provide technical assistance as a first step. It's important to note that these housing laws are changing all the time and they're very complicated. So it is possible that jurisdictions are getting it wrong in part because they don't know the right way to do it. And HCD's first level of intervention is almost always technical assistance because we acknowledge that this is really hard work. However, if we offer technical assistance and it isn't followed, we can follow enforcement escalation path. There are 2 paths here. So kind of at the top third of the screen, you'll see it split into 2 paths. The left side is housing element enforcement. These are those programs we were talking about, rezone programs, other things related to a housing element. If a jurisdiction is not meeting its housing element commitments, we can write a notice of violation, a notice of potential violation, a notice of non-compliance, etc. But what makes the housing element path unique is HCD has the ability, just like it does to review a housing element and certify it, we also have the ability to decertify a housing element. And remember, without a compliant housing element, jurisdictions are no longer able to access certain funding programs and other consequences that we talked about earlier. The right side of the chart talks about enforcement escalation, but does not include decertification. So we can't decertify a housing element over, say, a violation of state density bonus law all by itself. But we can move through notice of potential violation, notice of violation, and finally, for either one of these paths, we are able to make referrals to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General can sue on behalf of HCD. Next slide. So wins. we talk about our success, we call them wins, and our favorite metric to really track them are units. So you'll see on our dashboard, we like to think about how many units we've unlocked. We use that term kind of loosely, but anytime HCD has had some intervention, you'll see these are acronyms in the table. I apologize, they're not described, but an NOV is a notice of violation, a TA letter is a technical assistance letter, NOPV is a notice of potential violation, and an LOS is a letter of support. And in each of these cases, HCD provided some type of letter, and it has resulted in actual units, projects that maybe were heading toward denial or were denied and had been appealed, have been overturned or approved and resulted in real units. The next slide, I think, has broader numbers. Yes. So the top table is, I think, a snapshot in time of what our dashboard looks like. I'm proud to say we've unlocked over 6,000 housing units, including over 2,000 affordable units through the work of the Housing Accountability Unit. The Surplus Land Act team, which is a subset of the Housing Accountability Unit, they're killing it. They've got over 14,000 units based on their disposition work. Next slide. So this is for future reading. If you are interested in the enforcement cases that have gone well past notice of violation and into lawsuits, stipulated judgments, we have provided an amicus brief in Costa Mesa related to group housing. Those are available here. These are links that you can click and read more information. And finally, we're here to help. We really do start with technical assistance, so we are light touch as much as we can be, and we move into heavy enforcement only when necessary. We can't know everything without the help of stakeholders, so please do submit information, complaints, things you've noticed to our portals. We're happy to receive it. We're happy to process that information. Having people in local communities is invaluable to us in doing the work that we do. So that's it. I think I'm tossing it back to Veronica. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share our work.
Thank you, Shannon. So we'll move into our feedback and listening. So on the next slide, we'll share our discussion questions, and we're asking that you provide us with your feedback in response to these questions. I want to reiterate this is not a Q&A session where we're in a position to provide you with answers about programs or services, but rather we're asking you for your input to help shape the report and help us set up some department fair housing goals for the coming years. I'm also going to be launching these questions as individual polls where you can actually type in a response for those who prefer to respond that way. So the questions we have for you today are, what is the biggest challenge people living in urban areas of California face in finding and securing housing? Have you ever wanted to live somewhere but couldn't, and what prevented you from living there? What does your ideal community or place look like? Does it exist? And what would need to happen for that to become a reality? And what do you want the government to do to make your community better? For anyone who would like to share their thoughts on these in any particular order, go ahead and raise your Zoom hand and I will call on you in order. We'll get through as many speakers as we can. And I'd like to reiterate how much we appreciate that you're willing to share any of your thoughts or experiences with us today. Okay, I don't see any hands raised at the moment, so I'll go ahead and launch the first question. Give me 1 second here. Okay, while we're setting up the poll, I'll go ahead and call on Alex. Sorry, full transparency, we're having a little technical difficulty right now. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and launch question one. I'll give everybody a couple of minutes to go ahead and type in your answers, and then we'll start calling on folks who want to speak it instead. Okay, it's been about a minute. I'll give you another probably minute or so. I'll give it about 15 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it. Anybody who has a couple more words to type, I see a couple more coming in. Okay. So, Alex, I'm going to go ahead and call on you. You want to unmute?
Can y'all hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Should I just answer the first question or other comments as well?
Comment whatever you would like.
Yeah, so I live here in Oakland, and I think like most people, just the cost of living is incredibly high and the cost of housing is incredibly high. And I appreciate the amount of work that the state is putting in to increase housing production. One thing that I would like to see more of in conversations around fair housing is conversations and more work towards preservation. And I know that the state does some stuff, and they're here in the Bay Area. There is a little bit of money from BAFA that will hopefully go towards preservation if things move forward there. But I think one of the things that is challenging in the housing space is there's a difference between creating housing and keeping people in place and home. And as housing gets more expensive, people have their rents increased, have negligent landlords, are forced to move out of their place, and then have no real place to go. And we can't build our way out of this problem. I know. I hope we can build it. We can do enough building to get there, but we really need to be pairing production with preservation, and that means providing resources and support from the state and for cities and local jurisdictions to do more targeted anti-displacement work when tenants are being faced with no-fault evictions, or landlords are selling homes, or folks are experiencing landlord harassment, or when affordable housing units, when their covenants are expiring, because it's a lot of work and quite expensive to have folks, particularly poor and working class folks, experience displacement, potentially experience homelessness, and then have to wait years to get on a lottery for an affordable housing place or to get a Section 8 voucher. So I'd like to see more of a focus on that, particularly in exclusive communities. And I know that, wealthier communities are oftentimes are NIMBYs and prevent development. And I do think that preservation can be a strategy that can address some of those issues. The other thing I wanted to mention too is just another thought is around AMI. I don't know what the response is to this, but in Oakland and much of California, area median income is quite high. And so, when we have affordability based off of AMI, folks who are low income who could pay 30% of their income, 30% of your income is still a lot of money in expensive places like this. And so, I don't know what a better answer is, but just AMI can be a tricky tool for affordability. Those are some reflections. I've talked a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex, for sharing all of that with us. I really appreciate it. Okay, how about Catherine? Are you there,
Hello,
Catherine?
can you hear me?
Oh, yep, we can, yep.
Great. Hi, I'm Katie, or Catherine Dumond, and I live in Richmond, and I work in tenant legal services in Oakland. And I really appreciate what Alex was saying and want to build off of that. Sorry, I'm outside, so it might be a little noise. I totally agree that we can't just build our way out of this. And I'm skeptical that unless supply of social housing, public housing, affordable housing is really increased, it's really going to make a difference to the folks who most need housing. Simply supply on its own, I am very skeptical is going to increase fair housing. And I guess I'm a little troubled that this presentation has been so focused on supply and enforcement of supply mechanisms without really talking about fair housing, about discrimination, about access for the folks who most need housing and have historically experienced exclusion, cost gouging, et cetera, et cetera. I think I would love to hear more about that and what the state is doing about that. I feel like the conversation has really been taken over by the supply side of it, which is an important element, but I think is kind of does not fully address the question of fair housing.
Do you want to start it, Shannon?
Veronica, yeah, would you mind if I'm not sure that this is going to fully satisfy you, Catherine, but I really appreciate the feedback because it's reminding me that maybe in my presentation, I'm not highlighting some of the ways our work is touching some of those concerns. So you're not wrong. Certainly we are focused on supply and the Housing Accountability Unit, at least in the work that I'm working on. But I would like to make sure it's clear that this supply is often affordable units. It is sometimes group housing. It is sometimes housing, the transitional housing, supportive housing, unit types that are for specific disadvantaged communities. Some of our most recent work has actually been, or really public work has been in that vein. You might have seen headlines recently about Anaheim and the state working on a transitional housing project there. The courts agreed with us. So certainly more work can be done, but I do want to make sure that it's clear that the work that we're doing to support housing supply is not just market rate developers, it is housing for all communities. So anyway, if I sound defensive, I think I just wanted to make sure that you are aware that there are different housing types available. It's not just market rate development. But your point is well taken. Preservation is important,
Yeah, thank you.
all types of housing are important.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you, Catherine, for your comment. Okay. How about Beck?
Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Awesome. This is Beck. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am the systems change advocate for the Dale McIntosh Center for people with disabilities in Orange County. And I thank you all for your presentation, and I thank the folks prior to me who highlighted some super important aspects of housing within California. I'd like to build off of that and make a suggestion that Section 8 housing be looked at with a microscopic lens, because it is exceedingly easy for small landlords, big landlords, every landlord in between to cover up not accepting Section 8 vouchers just because of the sheer volume of applications. So if a landlord has 5 applicants, all of them qualify, and one of them has Section 8, the likelihood that they're going to choose the person with Section 8 is slim to none, unless they have some sort of other reason to. And in my own experience with housing authorities, they have a disincentive to work with housing authorities, because oftentimes housing authorities will return request for tenancy approval by saying, oh, could you lower the rent another $200, $100, and then we'll approve it. By that time, that unit is far gone. And in addition to that, a landlord that can find the amount that they're asking is not going to lessen the rent for a Section 8 housing choice voucher holder. So I think that a minimum percentage of Section 8 housing choice vouchers should be allotted per housing development, including current developments, not just older development or not just new developments, because that's the only way it's going to ensure that people with Section 8 vouchers are getting placed. The last I heard, the placement rate for Section 8 vouchers was around 19%. And I am not surprised in the slightest by that, but I think that we could do a lot better. Over.
Thank you so much, Beck. And how about Chantel? You there, Chantel? Okay, I'm going to move to the next person, but Chantel, your hand is still up and I will keep you in the queue and call on you next. So I will go to WC.
Hello?
Hello. Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for the platform and sharing the information. And this one's might seem like it's somewhat unrelated, but I think it ties together for like for let's say small business owners or landlords who are looking to actually serve and offer affordable housing to address the issues that were already mentioned. It's almost a statement and a question, in what I'm about to say. It appears that a lot of times the contracts that are offered for the affordable housing are given to organizations, companies, businesses that are well versed in the process and understand how to maximize returns. And not to say that that's all the time, but so those who are really looking to improve and impact the community so it's mutually beneficial for all, fair housing, affordable housing, and also, a space that provides income for the landlord, but to make it fair for everyone. So it's not like it's just market rent with questionable intent. And let me put a period on that. So so it'd be nice if there was information forwarded on a consistent basis to those who really want to serve the community. And I don't know if any other, forgive the frankness of, as opposed to exploitation and maximization of return. Um, and then the second part is, if there's a way to do that and offer those opportunities so that those smaller organizations can actually get access to those contracts, that will be helpful. And whatever screening would need to be done to make sure that exploitation didn't occur, that'd be great, because I think there are folks who do want to improve the community, yet they may not know how to access the money that's required in order to build this type of housing.
Okay, thank
And
you
then the
so much. Oh. Can you unmute yourself again? I'm so sorry.
Oh no worries. I paused, and then because the question just would simply be, if even if it's just like a link or information, so for those who do want to have a collaborative, healthy relationship with the community, where it's not like this, I really don't know. I'm really trying to filter for a better word, but kind of exploitation of maximization of either the vouchers and then questionably, um, questionably, like, questionable amenities that are in this environments that are really there to cater, as opposed to a contract that looks really good, that meets the qualifications, and they get the funding. Just almost like the least amount of money that they can spend, the cheapest money, which a lot of times grants or SBA backed loans, that's the money that can be obtained, and then there's a maximization on return. It's not really about serving and providing affordable housing. So if there's a way to just kind of get that access, that information to those who really want to serve, and please vet whoever they are, that would be lovely. And if you can just even share a link or suggestions, that would be wonderful. And that's a little bit on the other side. It's not necessarily those who are receiving direct services, but more so for those who are providing it.
WC, I wanted to just address your comment. I'm on the fair housing team as well. I think the point you're making comes to a larger issue. You know, we've talked a lot about supply. We've talked a lot about the cost constraints of housing. And I think the point you're making is somehow incentivizing people who develop housing in a nonprofit way. So there are actually nonprofit housing developers that provide affordable housing. A lot of HCD's programs, funding programs, are awarded to nonprofit developers. It can get quite technical to go into the full details, but you know, developing housing in general is an expensive proposition. And so especially if you're a nonprofit developer, you need to access as many funds as possible. So say you're based in Oakland, you may be getting some housing funds from the city of Oakland, but you might also want to see if you can apply for more funds from the state, like HCD. So we do offer through our various programs, depending on the type of housing that's being developed, maybe for people experiencing homelessness or people with disabilities, we do have funding that they can apply for, usually on a competitive basis, because we want, you know, we have different standards that we're trying to meet, different state needs for the housing types that we have across the state. But nonprofit development is something that we generally incentivize. And of course, there's always the problem of funding those programs to a larger scale to meet more of the need. So maybe that's another element of what you're suggesting, but just wanted to hop on and add that bit of context as well.
Thank you for that. And it's so loaded when I'm referencing. I just didn't want to avoid what seems to be just so unfortunate, is that, you know, it's this affordable housing movement and the funds are available, and then those who are really there to serve and offer assistance to create a different world where it's fair for, everyone. It should be a great place for someone to live, for them to be able to afford to live. It's like the larger companies who are used to doing it, who have grant writers who are on payroll, and they're just used to submitting it. They're the ones who often get it. So now, if a lot of work, how is there going to be a return? Whoever gives the funds, they need to know that the people who are doing the work, they know what they're doing, and they're able to execute. So it's a whole lot of dynamics, different sides, and different areas of focus, and even more conversations and a lot of work. Yet, the it just I would love to see more, and I'll contribute and not just bring this up and not do anything. So I'll make sure to do it on my end. But not everyone's out to squeeze, use, and exploit. Not to say that every single landlord, every single company that says affordable housing is trying to do that. It's just that there are some who really do have good intent, and it's just not as easy if they're not the big box companies or larger organizations to get to that. So I appreciate your comment. It gives different areas of focus and consideration so that those on the line who've experienced this, including myself, with the points that like Alex and other folks brought up, so that we can kind of be part of the positive change and not just get funds, that's the cheapest money, and then kind of give the impression that we're doing affordable housing that's really changing and making a difference, and it's not. So thank you so much, because that was a lot of time. I'm sure other people need to speak. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, I'm going to move over to Suzanne Kim.
Yeah, I just want to echo what the previous speaker had mentioned. Yes, there are funds being used for that are targeted for nonprofit developers, but not all nonprofit developers are the same. There are community-based nonprofits that do address the particular needs and requirements of particular communities, and that needs to be acknowledged more by HCD. Your grant programs are increasingly becoming prohibitive for community-based organizations, nonprofits, and I realize that you are prohibited from using race as a qualification, but the requirement, the patronizing requirement where you have to have a particular experience to even apply for certain development grants is very, very discriminatory. And it precludes the variety of housing needed to address the variety of needs of various communities. In particular, there is a growing HCD requirement across their grants saying that for development grants, saying that you had to have the firm or the nonprofit had to have done 2 projects of the same size in the past 10 years in order to even apply for development grants. Well, that's going to exclude almost every community-based organization out there. And the presumption behind that regulation actually is that if you don't have this particular experience, you can't. It's too difficult for you to build, and so therefore we can't support you, and we're afraid that you're going to mismanage the money. I can tell you that for-profit organizations that actually use commercial lending, they can use their principals and not just the firms, not just the organization's track record in securing funds, and that's adequate enough for commercial banks to have confidence that the project will get built. So I urge you to really consider what the previous caller was alluding to, is that these funds are not, they may be going to nonprofit developers, but they're not going to nonprofit organizations that are community-based, that are really trying to provide a housing typology that actually fulfills what a particular and specific community wants, desires, and would benefit immensely from. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Suzanne. I appreciate it. I'm going to move over to launch poll question number 2. And that is live. So I'll check in with you in about a minute and let you know that there is about a minute left. I think it's been about a minute. I'll give it another minute. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. And we don't have any hands up right now, so I'm going to go ahead and launch into question 3. I'll let you know in about a minute as passed. It's been about a minute. I'll give you another minute. Okay, we'll go ahead and end that one. And again, we don't have any hands up right now, so I will launch right on into question 4. Okay, I'm gonna give this last one about another 40 seconds. Okay, thank you all the people who participated and answered the polls. Thank you all to the people who spoke with us today. Oh, Alex, you want to go ahead?
I'm back.
Hi.
Yeah, I just on this question, there's a lot that the state can do, and I touched on a lot of those things. I think one thing that I wanted to mention that I don't think was brought up in this conversation is just the role that, or just the privatization of housing. And I know that we talk about social housing. There's a conversation, public housing is complicated, but I just think that like when you ask, what does your ideal urban community look like and does it exist? I think as a, as a millennial, as a 33-year-old, I have in my adult life have not been in a housing crisis. And that is fueled by a lot of things, and we could talk for hours about the roots of the housing crisis, but we can't talk about it without mentioning the role that investment and speculation plays. And I know that there have been some bills introduced the state and the federal level around corporate landlords, but I know that wealth is not a protected class, but it's hard to talk, like we can't talk about fair housing without talking about the role that investment and extraction and speculation plays in making housing inaccessible and unaffordable, particularly to low-income communities of color. I don't know what the answer is on that, but when it comes to, just this question of what do I want the government to do to make my community better, I want to see more investment in housing production. I want to see more investment in preserving the existing affordable housing that we have so more folks do not go into homelessness. And I want to prevent the conditions that create housing instability and insecurity, and that is largely the use of housing as a tool for wealth creation and not for housing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, I don't see any other hands up right now. If there was anything anybody wanted to add, you can go ahead and do that now. If I'll keep an eye on it, but if not, we really appreciate everybody joining us today. Our final session is going to be, like I said, next Wednesday, and it's rural California. So with that, I guess we will let everybody off the hook early. Thank you so much for joining today. We will be posting our recordings and slides. That's a little bit of a process to get them onto the website, but they will be sent to the website. So I know we've received a few questions from people asking if the recording would be made available, and they will, but that'll take a few weeks. So thank you all for being here today. We appreciate it.